shows this, that in order to attach, to learn how to attach, which is critical to making choice, you have to attach at a very young age, within the first 2 months of your life. I have to attach to somebody. I have to feel comfortable. I have to know those things. Attachment is necessary for cause and effect learning. If you are detached, there is an operating theory out of Dartmouth in the United States that a significant number of people with traumatic brain injury also probably had youths where they had significant difficulties with attachment. Whether they had attention deficit disorder so they didn't attach, whether they came from, brain injury does not randomly select its victims. So what happens is you have a whole bunch of people that lived these and they didn't attach. So they never really learned how to make choices because they never really learned cause and effect. In a broad scale, what they learned, the cause and effect they often used is when somebody comes around who's bigger than you, it's not good. So authority and power and all those kind of things usually results in something negative for me. So what you learn is to not attach to people and not connect, and the only choice you have, you're driven towards choices that are in the moment, so you're not driven to choices, you're driven towards impulsiveness because you live in the moment at the end of your nose. The next step up is either or, forced choice. 2-year-olds. The 2-year-old, what is, many mistakes new parents make, which is, I love you so much, tell me, here is all the cookies you would like. Would you like Oreos? Or would you like this one? Or would you like Chips Ahoy? Or would you like this stuff? And then kids go, ah! Choose. Either or, forced choice. We have to get good at forced choice before we can go up to fixed choice, which is a specific array. Often what happens is, if we don't help kids figure this one out, and if we don't help people with brain injury figure this out, and we start giving them a wider array, they go on tilt. They can't manage it. It's too much information. So I'm going to be good at either or before I go to the next level, which is as many fixed choice. And then this last one is free choice, anything I want. Now what happens is, like in the States, that is the 18-year-old who goes off to college for the first year. And what they don't realize is there's no such thing as a free lunch. And what happens is, if they have it now, failure rates, by the way, in the United States, this goes to show about how we're screwing up with our kids. The dropout rate at universities is going up. And there's a number of factors that are associated with that, and it has to do with, there's sort of these operating theories about choice. Is because what happens is we protect and we say all this other kind of stuff, and you never feel the natural, logical results of what you did. We protect you, we do this kind of stuff. So when you go off to college, you have no idea how to live. And because you have no idea how to live, you can think you can do anything you want, and then you come back after a semester because you flunked out, or you've been drinking too heavily, or. But there are parallels with the folks with brain injury that we work with. Because at the earliest stages of recovery, cause and effect, as people are moving through the stages of recovery, they need to figure out either or. That's like, it's yes, no. And then as they get more ability, we give them increasing opportunities until we get to the point where it's like it's your life. So when you see how the parallel in intervention in rehab is parallel to the normal development of choice. Often what happens, though, if we're not careful, if somebody is still here and they're years post and we go here, then all they do is respond in consistently or continuously impulsive and non-functional ways. So choice is selecting with reason. Impulse is sudden inclination to move. And you think about that, what we need to do is figure out where on this hierarchy are the folks that we're working with, and then figure out how do we, now remember, let's go back to chronological age and stuff like that. So you have somebody who's chronologically or cognitively 25 or 26, and they expect this, but behaviorally, and cognitively they're here. We have to be really careful how we're talking. And that's something that often what happens is we don't, we have to be sensitive to those realities. Does that make sense? So choice as an important element of what we do around this kind of stuff. So, another thing to remember when we think about choice, often what starts as a choice doesn't end as a choice. Often often there is a certain momentum or a compulsion or an obsession or a perseveration, whichever it is, that what started as a choice, you start losing control over it because it has a momentum of its own and you're on this kind of stuff. So the idea is that I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to live, I'm going to go try and go with my friends and do this kind of stuff. And at first I'm doing really well. The momentum of my friends doing really goofy things makes me do really goofy things. But the reality is my friends who don't have brain injury, they'll stop when they know it's too much. But now I am on a roll and I can't get off that roll and I'm going to keep doing it and I'm going to keep doing it. And before you know it, I'm the guy who everybody's saying you got to stop that kind of stuff and I'm doing kind of kooky things. And it started as I'm going out with my friends and we're going to have fun. And it turned into I am doing incredibly dangerous things. And there is a point in time when we cross over from choice to impulse or perseveration. Now, why is that important? Because if we're not, now we spend a lot of time, especially with families and natural networks of support, around that concept. Oops. Because often what happens is we think, oh, they're making a choice. And we have to help them say it started as a choice, it didn't end as a choice. Because what happens is if you're not careful and you think it's always a choice, then it becomes can't do, won't do, don't do, right? So it started as a choice, then it becomes it's a won't do, when in fact it could have started as a choice and then became a can't do. Does that make sense? And so we frame how we're interacting with people like, okay, how did it start? Where do you think it came off the rails? What is your theory? What is your hypothesis? What do you think about those things? So how are we organizing around individual supports that make sense? And when we do, so the notion of this stuff is that when we know that it's now becoming an overwhelming kind of impulse, we just roll. And sometimes, what often happens is it's going to play itself out until it runs out of its own energy. And when somebody's really impulsive, and we try to intervene with somebody really impulsive, if they're on a roll, that's danger time. Because they often get into they see, I know what I'm doing, you can't tell me, and there's no reasoning with somebody. If it's a won't do, or a don't do, or a can't do, there's no reasoning, there's managing. And that's what we do, we manage something. Make sense? Yep.
So how do you manage that?
Very carefully.
Yes. So you've got to pick that point, don't you, where it's before the momentum gets too much.
Right.
So
how do you know?
Yeah.
So the question, the way that we talk about that is that we ask the question, which is, at what point, at any point, did you feel like you were less in control than any other point? And if people say no. If I talk to other people about you, what do you think they would say? I don't know. So can I talk with your friend? Can I talk with whoever it is, the person that you're with, and say, when did you notice that it seemed like it was getting out of control? Now, why would we engage that person? Because coming from me, it's just me being a therapist. Coming from a person who's a valuable person in the context of my life, it has far more powerful meaning.
Like a friend, a peer.
Friend, peer, a mother, a father, somebody that you have a more personal connection than you have with me. It's authentic feedback in the environment is usually how we try to address that. So who was it around here that was with you? Were you right? Now, there's been plenty of times this stuff happens and the person's by themselves or with the staff person. And they're like, the staff person, a whole bunch of assholes, I'm not going to listen to that. So then it requires, okay, so let's figure out what we're going to do and how we can manage this stuff and what worked and what didn't work. And you have to be a little bit, you have to continuously ask questions. Well, let's go back to the framework. And the framework is going to be, here's what I noticed. And you started, from what I understand, you were doing all right and then you didn't. So what changed? Do you think it's worth talking about? When did you stop having a good time? When did you notice? Remember how people say, I didn't notice until the cops came. I've had people say that. Okay, let's try to walk it back. What do you remember? What do you not remember? Do you remember what it felt like? What were you thinking when? At what point did you stop thinking? Do you remember the difference between? So you're just asking a bunch of questions. But you're not doing 20 questions. You're doing, so let's think about this. This is really interesting. This is really hard. So do you agree it didn't work out? Yes, so it didn't work. Okay, great. So based on that, is it worth effort? Yes. So it's a big enough deal that you want to work on it? Yes. Okay, so let's try to figure it out. What's more likely going to cause? Like, what's the cause? We just are more interested in the functional change. And so there's some things that we don't understand why, and it's okay. But as long as if there's movement, positive movement in a direction, we may never understand the etiology of something. All right. What matters is there a change in your life that you see as valuable and purposeful, and you need. That's where we spend our time. Does that make sense? Simple, isn't it? Really hard.
Yeah, I have come across something like that, and I thought I saw the point where it changed.
You had a theory that you saw that. So the idea is that we want to talk about what's your theory, and so I will talk about it with the person and say, oh, you know what, I noticed this. This is my theory. I think that it started going off the rails here. What do you think? If the person says, I don't agree with you, you say, okay, that's my theory, and your theory is I'm wrong. You want to test it? You know, the ideas, we're always open to the idea, let's test our theory. But let's make sure we are both on the same point about what the problem is. So, impulsive is not a problem. Impulsive is a theory. Choice is the theory. We have to try to figure out if the theory is correct. All right? So, we try stuff out. If we're going to do this, we're going to try stuff out. If something doesn't work, we try something else. We continuously demonstrating that we're trying. When that doesn't work, we try something else. Our only limitations is our own imagination. Like I said, we were in Memorial Hospital. That was pull that out of my ass. What's the worst that would have happened? Somebody would have gnawed on my hand, and I would have, that didn't work. But the idea is you're going to keep, and that's what we want. You know, we think about positive supports for people. What we want to do is continuously encourage it. There's always something that works. We just got to try to figure it out. And what do we learn? We got to keep trying. We're going to try something else. We're going to try something else. And what's really interesting in the literature on positive psychology, you're familiar with Marty Seligman and learned helplessness and learned optimism and all that other kind of stuff. What have they learned over 50 years of their research? That mindset changes the way that the individual who's the target of intervention and the people who are providing the intervention think. And it is almost always positive. And what they do is they look at a bunch of different measures. They look at measures of completion of, like, they looked at high school, they looked at job involvement, they looked at a whole bunch of things around that. They also looked at self-evaluations of general happiness, and they also looked at general indicators of happiness from other people. And what they found was that the staff who felt like this were happier, and the individuals and their families were happier, and the outcomes were more positive at a very objective level. They succeeded more. They were willing to take risks, where in many ways they were not willing to take risks. Because what they did is they said, okay, what's the worst that can happen? So within that, the framework we use is this notion of goal, obstacle, plan, to review. We've written stuff about this for hundreds of years. Goal, obstacle, plan, to review. That is the framework. That is another way of thinking about more detail. What does that mean? Before we start everything, we have an idea. What are we trying to accomplish? What is the goal? The goal could be for the next 10 minutes. The goal could be for the next hour, whatever it might be. Obstacle. What's going to get in the way of our goal? Plan. What are we going to do? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Do it, and at the end, review it. Before we do anything, when we walk in the door, within 5 minutes, the conversation we're having is, what is the purpose that I'm here for? What are we going to try to accomplish? What do you want? I'm going to, somebody said you need my help. You ask me for help. Somebody else asks me for help. What? How do you define help? You tell me how we'll know it's working or not working. And we spend a lot of time, and I spend a whole time with somebody just talking about that. Why? If we don't know the end in mind, we're going to go in a different direction. It's the same thing as we don't know what the problem is. Same point here. Now, goal, we don't, by the way, it's not like we sit down and say, what's your goal? What are the obstacles? We have conversations with people. Say, okay, we're going to be together for an hour. How do we know this worked out? How do we know that this was a good thing? How do we know this is helping? How do we know? How do we know we're done? What will it look like if it's working out really well? And then, what's going on here? What I noticed is I might be an obstacle. So, I don't understand what you want. So there was a guy that we were working with that he was working on his car in his garage. And so I went in and he didn't want to stop working on his car and stuff like that. So I was just trying to tinker around his car. I had no ability as a mechanic. And I said, look, I'm going to be here for an hour, and what do you think? What are we going to try to accomplish here? And he's like, well, my wife says you need to be here because if I don't shape up, she's going to divorce me. So we got an hour. I'm not going to stop me from getting divorced. So what are we going to do for an hour? He says, well, you know what? For me to even get comfortable with you, I'm just going to have to know who you are and stuff like that. Can you help me out? And I'm like, okay. I said, but there's an obstacle. What's that? I said, I don't know anything about cars. I go and I bring my car to the garage and they fix it. So he's like, oh, that might be a problem. So what can we do? So you're working on something that's important to you, and then we're going to help you achieve something that you know this is important. So what's your job and what's my job? So what happened was we had this whole conversation about the idea is that he would take breaks, and then we'd have conversations. And then what I would do is I'd have to hand him a tool, and then he would take breaks, and we'd have conversations, and that was our plan. At the end of the first time we were out there for probably an hour and a half, I said, so, how do you think it worked? And he said, you're right, you suck as a mechanic, you have no idea what you're doing. He said, but you know something? You listened to me, you let me do my thing, so let's do this again. So we went back the next time, and what happened the next time? He worked on his car for about half the time, and then he popped up and said, yeah, now we should probably have a conversation. And by about the fourth or fifth time, he didn't work on his car anymore. And what he said, it was interesting, because he said, you're like the fourth or fifth person that was supposed to help me. And I said, so why were you willing to work with me? He said, everybody else said, I can't work with you if you don't get your head out of the car. Because my time is valuable. And he said, you know what? No, this is my life. It's a series of compromises within this notion of goal. What are the obstacles? And we have to be honest about it. It's like there are lots of obstacles. It's not going to go as easily as we want. So we're going to try plan A and plan B, like I said. The idea then is that we do things with dignity and respect. We think in ways that are dignified. So we always ask if they want our help before we start helping. What is another term for a helpful verbal prompt? Nag. If the person says, I don't want your help, we stop. Great. Can you have a little conversation? Why not? Is it me? Is it the situation? Do you think you need help that maybe somebody else could help? But we don't do anything until someone says they're ready for our help. That means we do a lot of false starts, try again, and that's okay. I can't tell you how many times that people say, I don't want your help, I don't want your help, and then usually what happens is some crisis occurs, and then they're like, I need your help now. Fine. It's like I said, I have gone and seen people in jail that I have gone and talked to a number of times that have said, I don't need your help, but now they're behind the glass in the orange jumpsuit, they're ready for my help. That's a good thing. Nobody died. It's going to make life a little bit harder because you're going to we have to figure out, what are we doing? Because now it's harder because I've been arrested for something. Once the person says they want your help, then you have to say, so I want to make sure we're clear about what help looks like. I'm going to do this. Is that right with you? So you're not saying, okay, now I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to say, I think help should be, we're going to sit and we're going to have a conversation about making a plan. We're going to sit and we're going to have a conversation about your identity. We're going to sit and have a conversation about strategies to interact with your kids in a way that is not going to be disruptive. We're going to have a conversation about your alcohol or substance use. Are you ready? And if somebody says, yep, now we'll have that conversation. If they're not ready to have the conversation, we'll have another conversation. Because what we're trying to do is to move away from pathology. You know, there's a lot of folks we work with that spend a lot of time in and out of various kinds of treatment programs. And there's this one guy that we work with, Steve, one of my favorite people in the world. First time I met him, he was chained. He was 21 years old. He was chained, so they came in. He was in a psychiatric hospital. Chained, wrists, ankles, waist chained this way, and came in like this. Sat on the thing, and he had 3 staff. 3 staff with him. And they were like, yeah, we're sitting here. I said, no, take the chains off. And he looked at me, he looked at them, and they were like, I gotta talk to my boss. They came in with a release that basically said, I know he's gonna kill me, but I won't sue you. Signed it. Take the chains off. And he looked at me, he said, who the hell are you? And I said, I'm trying to help. People say you need my help. Can you tell me what help's gonna look like? He looked at me and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know you, so what should I know? What do you think you need help with? What do you want to do? He said, I want to get the hell out of here. Great. What can we do? How can I help you figure out how we're going to get out of here? We ended up talking for like 2.5 hours. Until they finally came in and said, you know what? He missed his meds. After his chain. You know, help was get me out of here. So we had to come up with this whole plan and we got him out of there. But he had to say, this is what I'm doing. Especially with a guy like that, because what would have happened, do you think? What had happened in his previous life? He had killed 3 people who said, I'm here to help. Killed them. Killed them dead. That's pretty cool. Dude, that works. But the notion is, you tell me. And he would be, and so anyway, he would have all this stuff, and he would say, I'm getting agitated, and so, you know, we got an apartment and all that kind of stuff. He smoked, and now the other thing was that, you know, he smoked. And when he was in the place, he only smoked, you know, like, he lived around the hour, because you could go out in 5 minutes and suck on as many death sticks as you possibly could, and then go back in for the 55 minutes, and then you come back, and that kind of stuff. So we had him come out, and he smoked all the cigarettes, and he would just smoke haze. And he would say, Tim, I'm agitated. I was like, I'm going to say, Steve, you're not agitated, you're worried. What? Everybody's got worries. You got worries, I got worries. It's not agitation, it's worry. What the fuck's your problem? You're worried. Worried is normal. You really think I'm normal? Yeah, I would be worried too. You're trying to figure out where you are, you're trying to figure out who's helping you, of course you're worried. But he had spent, like so many people, they get so into the, you know, the terminology that they forget most of what people experience. Okay, when somebody says they're Jesus or they say they're an archangel, that's not what most of us experience. But the reality is much of what happens is just sort of an amplification of normal kind of response. And the more we can have conversation with people and say, I understand what you're doing and what you're experiencing is not abnormal, given the circumstances of your life, that's not a bad thing, it's only a good thing, isn't it? And so we try to normalize as much as we possibly can. Now, that doesn't mean anything goes. So there are times, there are actions, there are activities that are negotiable, and there are times and activities that are non-negotiable. It doesn't mean anything you want. There are some things that are just non-negotiable. There are some things that, you know, we just can't get behind. So like I say, alcohol, substance use is one of those things that we just are like, I can't help you with that. We're not saying that you can't, we're just saying that I can't help you with that. But mostly everything is negotiable after that. So the notion that we have around this kind of stuff is that we only do what we can when we're invited to do it. And every interaction is an invitation. And if somebody doesn't invite us in, then we have to stop and wait. Because no matter what we think, no matter how great we think that what we're doing is, we always have to ask permission. We always have to remember, I am entering the life of another human being. And his or her willingness to have me in their life is going to be a function of the way that I treat them. And if I treat them with dignity and respect, and I do have a sense of a plan, and I do have that framework, I'm continuously giving them the feedback around this kind of stuff. And I'm continuously giving them the opportunity to sort of take control of their life in a positive way, with only one exception, and that's health and safety. That always trumps everything. And sometimes, you know, people do unsafe things and we got to just sort of manage it as best as we possibly can. So, within that is this idea of rituals of greeting and leaving and interacting. We're big into rituals. Silly little things. I said it before in our school that we had with those 19 kids. Everybody walked in the door, somebody shook their hand, everybody walked out, and somebody was standing there saying, "Have a good night, be safe tonight, I'm looking forward to being here tomorrow." Before we started working with kids, we'd say, "Okay, here's our plan. Anybody have anything different I want to say? Is there something that's going on in your head right now that's going to make it hard for you to do schoolwork? That's fine." With the adults that we work with, we have all kinds of conversations. So, like in our brain injury programs, it was interesting, and it was funny because most of the people were trained specifically in substance abuse programs. When we said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do," everybody walks in the door, we're going to be standing there greeting them and saying, "It's really good to see you today. I'm glad you're here." Because when you walk through the door, it's a victory. Everything else after that is cherry on top. We're glad you're here. You will look everybody in the eye, shake their hand, and call them by name, saying, "I'm glad you're here today." Does that sound hokey or what? Especially with a bunch of addicts. Especially with a bunch of addicts so often, a number of them have brain injury, especially with a bunch of addicts who have brain injury and have mental illness on top of it. And I remember the staff were like, "This is stupid, it's childish, it's all those other kind of things." But what we're really doing is we're demonstrating that we value you being here. And we know you don't have to be here. Rituals of greeting and interacting. So what we found was, what was really kind of interesting is that when we first started doing it, they had a different kind of program, and then we said, "Okay, we're going to do this differently." We said, "This is how we're going to do it," and we had a whole coaching thing around it. We talked about the idea. Everybody's going to talk about their goals for the day. We're going to do this kind of stuff. Everybody's going to be greeted. We're going to have them help them sign in. We're going to say what you're planning for being here today. We're going to do all those things. Those are our rituals. Every single person. And we have 38, probably 40 today, people in the program. We have 3 programs. One has 40, one has about 30-something, and the other one has like 20-something. It's fairly new. And what we found was, in the program that's been around for a while, that we had a real problem for a long time with people just not showing, so they wouldn't come in for treatment. You know, they always had a reason not to. And by doing that, our rate of attendance went up by 45% in a month. So, like, almost half of what the total was. And we asked people, "Why do you guys show up all the time?" And they were like, "Because you guys care. You're trying to help me figure out what I need to do." Rituals of greeting and leaving are critical. Now, there's the rituals of interacting, which is I come in, I shake your hand, do it all the time. Anytime that we're working with somebody, it is a ritual. You will shake their hand, even if it's a 4-year-old kid that doesn't have any with autism. You shake his hand, say your name, his name, her name, whatever it is, and you're going to start your work. And at the end, you're going to do the same thing. Shake their hand. Some kids like a hug. Give them a hug. That's fine. We've had some adults in some of our programs like, "Hug, give them a hug. That's fine. I'm glad. Be safe tonight. We'll see you tomorrow. Be safe this weekend." You got a plan. And that basic kind of ritual, we also did a similar thing in Saskatchewan, in the schools in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon. No, I'm sorry, in Regina. They have no sense of humor about what that rhymes with. And what we did is we had all the principals and all the teachers had to greet. And what they were doing is they were looking at the numbers of incidents. So in a month, they had about 300 incidents. That's really large school district. 300 behavioral incidents. And by having every principal stand in the door, every teacher stand in the door to greet kids on the way in and way out, by the end of the first semester we did that, the number of referrals for behavioral problems went down to like 20. We didn't do anything else. It's the rituals of greeting. It's the rituals of leaving. It's the ways of transitioning. Once we're done, we're together for this time. We'll know we're done when our time together is over. Now, obviously, that is an example we do it with everybody. We're having a conversation, but we have those interactions as a way of demonstrating dignity, as a way of demonstrating that we recognize that we are just an opportunity for you, and a way of reiterating this framework that I talked about. Okay? Anybody have anything they want to say? This is a good place to stop this man. Anybody have anything that they were like, "Crap, you sure should have done this"? Anybody disagree? Anybody? Oh, here's the crap part, yes.
Are we going to get the slides?
No, screw you. I'll give them to Nick and he'll make them available.
Now, before you leave, one of the few, perhaps the only aggravating thing about Tim Feeney is that he is equally talented in both mind and the body. So, perhaps in the course of today I didn't notice it, but as a way of building empathy with you guys, he divulged to you that he not only competes in triathlons,
I never cheat.
but you've run how many marathons?
Oh, wow.
A lot. So what do you give to the person